Hello, welcome back to this Notion series where I'm building a Notion template from scratch. This is the fourth video and I believe the last video, so at this point we have a lot of the work done already. We have several databases that will allow us to create tasks and projects, sort them into categories that I'm calling life tracks. We have recurring tasks, time tracking, we have the ability to track metrics and set goals for those metrics. And all of this we can start to view on the dashboard that we are building up. At this point in the process, I start to think about how I'm going to enter things into the template. And the way I typically like to do this is with database templates that use filtered database views within them. See, the way that Notion works is that if you have a filtered database in a view, even if that view is in a template, and then you use that view to create a new item, it will automatically force those filter values to be set to match the filter. And you can use a template reference on relation properties in the filter so that when you create a copy of that template, it is automatically filtered to the page that it is on. So this is very useful. A lot of people use this. You can skip a lot of the tedium of specifically connecting relations by having these filtered views in a template and making use of them. So to make these templates, I'm going to start from the top of the hierarchy and work my way down. So we're going to do life tracks first. If you haven't made any database templates before, you can create them from the little arrow menu on a database. And you'll see when you're editing a template, the little template banner at the top, so you'll always know if you're editing a template or if you're editing a real instance of an item. And the first part here, I just want to include the projects in this life track. Remember, the way that projects are defined is that they are just items in the tasks database that have sub-items. So we actually can't use the filtered view to add projects here. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work with formulas like that, just because it can't work its way backwards through the formula to figure out what needs to be true for that to be filtered. So this is really just for show, this first one. And the next database view we're going to add is just a tasks database filtered to this life track using the template option in the filter. And so that one is going to be how we actually add tasks. And then once we create a task that has sub-items, it will show up in the project one. And to make things as useful as they can be, as easy as they can be, whenever I add these database views where I'm intending that these are going to be used for entry, we're going to use this for data entry, I'm going to hide all the properties that are not editable by the user because they are just not going to be useful to see in this context. We don't need to worry about them right now. So just all the formulas and all of the relation properties that we don't need to specifically set are going to be hidden. And then the only things that are going to be left visible in this view are things that the user will need to put in when they first create a task. And if you find that you want additional views that are used in different ways, you can always add those to the database view as a tab. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to duplicate this view, add a second task view that is intended to show the status of all the tasks. So this one, we don't need as many of the task entry properties, but we do want to see the formulas and such. So I'm leaving the status, the progress formula, minutes tracked, amount done, and the target. And then in fact, I'm going to add a similar view to the project database as well. And then next on the life track template here, I'm going to add a view that allows me to add new metrics to the life track. And if I haven't talked much about metrics yet, these are really just a way of tracking results. And these are sometimes called lag indicators. So they're progress towards things that are either outside of your control or a result of something else that you've done. So the tasks are kind of tracking the input of what you're doing, and then the metrics are the output, what has actually resulted from those things that you were hoping to achieve by doing the tasks in the first place. There's a lot less in the metrics database because it's really just a container for a couple of values. It doesn't do a lot of calculations on its own. So here I've added metric units display type and then the display on track checkbox that I'll be able to set here. And I think that's enough for the life track template. We can create our life tracks and then come in here, create some tasks. use the table to add subtasks if we want to create projects, and then we can add the metrics. Now we want to make sure that this template is set as the default template for the Lifetrack database. To do this on the Lifetrack database, you can hit that little arrow button again, and then the dots next to the template that you want, and you can set as default. It'll ask if you want to do it for all views or not. This one I do want for all views. Now when I use the big plus button, it will generate this template for me automatically. Next, I want a template specifically for projects. Since tasks and projects share a database, this one we won't want to make the default. We just want to set this template specifically on projects, but that's okay. It will still come up as an option. Whenever you create a new item in the task database, it will show up there and you can just click it and it will fill it in for you. I also took a moment to clean up the page properties, so only the really useful ones take up space at the top of the page. You can always just hide the properties, and I would recommend doing this for anything that isn't really useful to see at a glance or something you can edit, just to keep things tidy. For this template at the top, I added a project name, a description box, just for fun, and then a tasks database filter to the tasks which have this template as the parent item. So we can use this to add tasks to this project. For properties on this first view, I'm getting rid of anything we won't need when first entering in a task. We'll be viewing progress and checking off tasks in the dashboard and on other views, so we won't need any of those. So just think about how you're going to use this, and you can make things easier for yourself down the road. I do also want to add a timeline for scheduling tasks that are part of a project, so I'll add that here as well. And since we can only set these values to the set date, this view won't be useful for rescheduling recurring tasks. You can't really do that with the way that I've set things up here. Like I said, it's a simplified version of recurring tasks because of some limitations of Notion. But what we can do is drag tasks to set the set date. At this point, I reevaluated my decision to let metrics be assigned to a project. I put little notes in the video, explained that I was going to take this away already, but my initial thought was for things like YouTube videos, which have their own separate metrics. I thought this might be useful. However, after thinking on it more, I just didn't want to constantly be updating things on each old project that I've done and constantly trying to keep track of all that. I think I want the metrics to be longer running, a result of tasks and projects over time. And I didn't want to have to create separate metrics for, like I said, individual video views and things like that. So I'm making the decision to get rid of this project relation on metrics. They're only tied to the Lifetracks for now as a way to track the overall progress. And then if I want to do over the course of a month, I want to try something out, I can add a goal that covers that month and kind of separate the progress in that sense. So I hope that makes sense. And of course, as you're building this template yourself, you can do this however you want to do it. Next, I took a detour and tweaked some things on the dashboard. I realized I was not showing projects on the dashboard anywhere yet, so I moved the task calendar down a row and put the projects and tasks side by side. I also decided to adjust the tasks so that they are grouped by Lifetrack, just because I think it'll look nicer this way and it will give me a better idea of how I'm dividing my time. I also added a project timeline with the active dates for any open projects shown on the timeline. Next, I dragged some of these database views into callouts just to make them stand out visually from some other parts of the screen. I'm not totally sure if I like this, but of course you can rearrange your dashboard however you want to. I think what I'll probably do is leave the templates as simple as possible and as non-branded as possible, and then when I duplicate it for myself, I'll add some images, add some colors, and to jazz it up a little bit, because I want the template to be as general use as possible, and then my own use, I'll suit it to my particular style. Now that I have the Lifetracks and projects covered by templates, next I'm going to make an easy way to enter new metrics and their goals. Also, I'm intentionally not adding a template for tasks. The way that I view tasks is that they are shorter lived, and they're mainly useful based on their properties. I don't really need a full page description of every task I'm doing. I'm just going to be editing the progress, The title will give me an idea of what that task is, and mostly the properties on the task are what's going to be useful. I think adding a whole template, it just creates more work to fill in the template, and it's just not really necessary. So we're going to keep things simple. But for the metric types, I do want a template, and it's going to be pretty simple, but it is going to just make things a little bit easier to input into the template. So we'll put a little header at the top, and then we will add a database view for the goals. So this view will connect to metric goals. It will be filtered to this metric type based on the template. And the goals have a lot of display properties, and here I can hide a lot of those and any formulas. So it's just the enterable stuff like we've been talking about, the date range, the target, the type, things like that. And then just in case you want to view the goals in sort of their display format, I've added a gallery for that as well. Now, this isn't strictly necessary, but it gives us another way to view this information. Below that, I added the entries database, so we can also add entries to this metric type very easily. Entries have very few properties, so you can just come in here when you have something to update, type in the new values, and you're set. We're almost done with this template now. I just want a couple more pages to allow me to view and update things in a way that feels natural. First, I'm going to make a quarterly view, monthly view, and then a weekly view, so we can view the plan on different time scales. I started with the quarterly page, knowing that Notion doesn't have a relative way to filter things to this quarter. They have some for this week, today, this month. I think they have this year as well, but they don't have this quarter, even though it is a time frame that's like supported by their date functions. And on this page, I want the goals at the top, because I always want what I'm aiming for to be top of mind, the first thing I see. And then I want to show the open projects and then the tasks in both a calendar format and a list format. And I realized the limitation of this a little bit later, but basically with the recurring tasks, they only show up once, and then the date actually changes when you complete them, so then they show up later. So recurring tasks will never be on the calendar in a way that's going to give you an accurate look at the full scope of work ahead of you. And it's kind of unfortunate, but that is how this system has to work. Otherwise, you are just creating all of the recurrences up front, which is something I've done before, and it's certainly something that you can do if you really want that visibility. But in the end, Notion is just missing like a couple of little things that would make this doable. So this is how I'm doing it for now. I'm going to see how it goes. But because of that, really only like the next week, the next 2 weeks are going to have all your tasks on them. And then you're going to have to actually complete or skip the recurrences to see the next week, for example. But I'm just setting up this quarterly view pretty quickly. We've set up a lot of database views at this point, so I'm not going to really go into detail about what I'm doing here because we've done it a lot. It should be pretty easy at this point. Setting up the monthly and weekly views, I actually ran into a problem. Using the relative dates doesn't work if the project or goals, which have a date range, start before that time frame, that month, and go past the end of that time frame. It doesn't consider that to be in the time frame. So for example, if I have a goal that runs for the entirety of Q1 and I want to see goals in this month and it's February, neither the start or the end date is within February, so it doesn't show up. That's kind of a problem. So I had to make a decision on whether to hard code dates or accept that the solution is going to be a little different than I want. And what I ended up doing was changing it to use the relative dates with a couple of befores and afters. So instead of this week or this month, I decided to change it to a 3 weeks view. So it's, on or after 3 weeks or 1 week ago, and then on or before 1 week from now. And this worked a little bit better. And then I did the same thing for a 3 months view, which is basically the quarterly view, but it's not tied to the specific quarters of the year. And then also a yearly view with everything for the year. And this one also will not work if the start and end are like outside of the year, but I figured it was probably a big enough time frame that it's okay. And after fiddling with the dates, I think I got all the filters set up the way that I want them to. So the way that the date filters work is that the goal's start date is on or before the end of the time frame, and the end date is on or after the start of the time frame. If both of those things are true, then we are within this time frame. At this point, I considered the template done, and I wanted to get it finished so I could go through the setup process myself and fine-tune a couple things that weren't right. And so here are some things that I decided to add or change basically before I finished editing this video. There may still be some things that I tweak before the template actually goes live, but I did my best to try and catch as many things as I could so I can get them in this last video. First, I realized I forgot to add the time tracking display values to the dashboard. So I did that. I added the time display property we made to the life tracks, and I also wanted it on projects. So I went in and added a quick display property on the tasks that formats the time identical to the one in life tracks, but since we already have the total minutes, we don't need to do any aggregation of those values. We can just use it. I also realized that recurring tasks would just keep going forever, and I didn't really like this. I would prefer to have them recur for a certain amount of time and then have separate recurring tasks for different months or different quarters. So I added a new property, recur until, which will represent the end date. I will have to add this to some of my task entry views that I set up so that you can actually set this when you're creating the tasks. And then in the next do formula, I made an edit so that once we have calculated the next date, we check if recur until is empty or if the next date is before or on that recur until date. And if that's true, we use the next date. Otherwise, we just use the last completed date. So recurring tasks will essentially stop on or before the recurred until date on the last day that they were completed. After that, I remembered that I wanted a view for open time logs so that if I start a time log, I can easily stop it later. And so I decided to put this beneath the projects gallery because I'm expecting that the task list will be longer than the project list. And so if I have this under here, the two columns essentially will roughly be the same height, if that makes sense. That's the hope. And then of course, when there's no open time logs, it will take up very little space, so it won't intrude on the rest of the template. And then finally, I knew I wanted to use this with Notion Calendar. And so I know that I need some date views on the original databases for that to work. At least that's what the announcement said. So I went back to the original task database. First, I added a projects only calendar based on the active date of the projects. And then I added a tasks calendar view using the next due date. If you prefer, you can add an additional view for the set date. The only thing is that it will not show later recurrences of recurring tasks, but it will allow you to drag and drop the set date. So like I mentioned in some of the calendar or timeline views within the Notion project, you can't set the next due date by clicking and dragging because it is a formula property, but you can do it with the set date. And that's it. My next step is copying a version for myself, running through the setup process, giving it a quick once over and tweaking anything that doesn't quite feel right or that I feel could be easier. And then I will release the template for other people to use. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, I believe I will put it up on my Ko-fi shop like I have done with the other two. And at this point, we've got what I would consider a fully featured productivity template. I can add all kinds of tasks, set recurrence dates, organize them into projects, set goals, track time, view progress. And the only thing that this template does not do is give you a place for other kinds of notes, which I mentioned at the very beginning is by design. I've decided that Notion, for me, isn't really good for that. And so this is entirely focused on tasks and projects. So thanks for sticking with me on this one. Stay tuned for the template itself. I will update these descriptions with the link when it's available for anyone who does not want to go through all this to build it themselves. In the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. These videos, and really any kind of tutorial videos, are a huge effort to make because they require so much research. I really have to think through the process to make sure I get it right. But I'm happy to do it because I love this stuff and I want to make things that are going to be useful for you. So I'll be back soon with another video, and I hope to see you there. Bye bye!